Right now, somewhere in your kitchen, a head of cabbage is softening. A bag of carrots is going limp in the crisper drawer. Cucumbers you bought 4 days ago are already developing that slick, translucent skin that means they're finished. You'll throw them away by Friday. You threw the last batch away too, and the batch before that. The average American household discards more than $1,600 of produce every single year, most of it vegetables that went from firm to rotten inside a refrigerator that was supposedly designed to prevent exactly that. But here's what no one told you properly. A preservation method older than written agriculture, requiring nothing but salt, water, and a glass jar can keep raw vegetables alive and edible for 12 to 18 months at room temperature. No electricity, no canning equipment, no vacuum sealer, no freezer bags, and the vegetables that come out the other side don't just survive. They contain more bioavailable nutrients than the day they were harvested. This is not folk mythology. In 1917, the United States Department of Agriculture published Bulletin No. 839, documenting lactofermentation as a standard household preservation technique. It was taught in public schools, it was printed in home economics textbooks, it was considered ordinary domestic knowledge, the kind of thing a 16-year-old girl was expected to understand before she graduated. By 1961, fermentation had been quietly stripped from the majority of U.S. home economics curricula, replaced by modules on refrigerator organization, branded canned goods, and supermarket meal planning. The method didn't fail. It was abandoned. And the reason has nothing to do with safety. Every week, American families lose 30 to 40% of the produce they purchase. Lettuce, peppers, cabbage, cucumbers, green beans, all of it decaying in refrigerator drawers that were never designed for long-term preservation, only short-term delay. A family of 4 spends roughly $150 a month on vegetables and loses close to $50 of that to spoilage. That's $600 a year dropped into garbage bags. And the solutions the market offers? More plastic wrap, more single-use produce bags, more frequent grocery runs, more expensive refrigerators with more specialized compartments that still can't stop the biology of decay. Meanwhile, a $2 jar of salt brine can do what none of those products accomplish. Lactofermentation works by submerging vegetables in a simple salt water solution, roughly 2 to 3% salinity, inside a sealed glass container. That's it. No vinegar, no heat processing, no pressure cooking. What happens next is not preservation in the way most people understand the word, it's transformation. Lactobacillus bacteria, naturally present on the surface of every raw vegetable you've ever touched, begin consuming the sugars in the produce and producing lactic acid. Within days, the pH inside the jar drops below 4.6, a threshold below which botulism, mold, and nearly all pathogenic bacteria physically cannot survive. The vegetables don't die, they stabilize, they enter a kind of controlled biological stasis, held in place by the very organisms that were already living on them. And the cost of this entire system is less than a bag of table salt and a jar you already own. If that sounds too simple, consider the scale of proof behind it. Lactofermentation has been independently developed by virtually every major agricultural civilization on Earth for at least 6,000 years. Korean kimchi, German sauerkraut, Japanese tukumano, Eastern European kvass. These are not novelties. They are the reason entire populations survived winters without refrigeration for millennia. In 2006, Fred Bright, a microbiologist at the USDA's Food Science Research Unit, confirmed something extraordinary in a study published in the Journal of Food Science. Properly salted, lacto-fermented vegetables have never produced a single documented case of foodborne illness in the United States. Not one. Compare that to home canning, which requires pressure cookers, precise temperature control, sterilized equipment, and has caused confirmed botulism outbreaks when done incorrectly. Fermentation requires a jar and salt. During both World Wars, the US and British governments actively promoted home fermentation as a civilian food security measure. Victory Garden pamphlets included fermentation instructions as standard practice. Governments trusted this method to feed populations during national emergencies. A 2014 study in the Journal of Applied Microbiology went further, finding that fermented cabbage contained up to 200% more bioavailable vitamin C than the same cabbage in its raw state. The process doesn't merely preserve nutrients, it multiplies them. So the method was ancient, proven, practically free, safer than canning, nutritionally superior to raw storage, and endorsed by federal governments during wartime. That was not the problem. That was the threat. Between 1945 and 1965, the American food industry underwent the most aggressive consumer behavior restructuring in its history. Refrigeration became mandatory household infrastructure. Canned and processed food became the default pantry model, and the educational system followed. Home economics textbooks published after 1961, including the widely used Experiences in Homemaking series, progressively dropped their fermentation chapters. In their place came branded product integration, refrigerator maintenance modules, and meal planning built around supermarket purchasing cycles. The economic logic was never complicated. A household that ferments its own vegetables, buys produce once, and stores it for months. No repeat purchases, no branded preservation products, no dependence on cold chain logistics, no weekly trips to restock what the refrigerator failed to keep alive. By the mid-1960s, the U.S. refrigeration industry alone was valued at $8 billion. The canned and processed food sector exceeded $20 billion. Both industries depended structurally, financially, and strategically on consumers not knowing how to preserve food independently. Nobody needed to ban fermentation. They only needed to stop explaining it. And when fermentation did appear in later academic or food science literature, it arrived wrapped in microbiology jargon. Lactobacillus plantarum, anaerobic glycolysis, pH buffering capacity, language dense enough to make a salt and water process sound like a laboratory procedure. The knowledge wasn't destroyed, it was made to feel inaccessible. There is a difference. The same pattern repeated elsewhere. Sourdough bread, once a household staple requiring only flour, water, and time, was replaced by commercial yeast and preservative-laden loaves engineered for shelf life and repurchase. Raw dairy fermentation, practiced for centuries, gave way to pasteurized and ultra-processed dairy products with shorter shelf lives and higher price points. Every time a durable, low-cost method threatened a recurring revenue stream, it was quietly edged out of mainstream knowledge, not by force, but by inconvenience. And here is the part that makes the pattern hard to ignore. In South Korea, where fermentation was never removed from domestic education, household food waste rates remain among the lowest in the developed world. Kimchi alone anchors a multi-billion-dollar preservation economy with virtually zero dependence on refrigeration for long-term vegetable storage. The method didn't stop working. One country just never stopped teaching it. So here is what was kept from ordinary language for 60 years. Choose any firm vegetable: cabbage, carrots, radishes, green beans, cauliflower, peppers, cucumbers. Dissolve 2 to 3 tablespoons of non-iodized salt per quart of clean water. Iodized salt inhibits lactobacillus. That detail matters. Submerge your sliced or whole vegetables completely in the brine inside a glass jar. Keep them below the surface using a small weight or a Ziploc bag filled with brine. Cover loosely. The bacteria will produce carbon dioxide that needs to escape. Leave the jar at room temperature for 3 to 7 days. You will see bubbles. That means it's working. Once the bubbling slows, seal the jar and store it. A cool, dark place is ideal, but not mandatory. The vegetables are now alive with beneficial bacteria and preserved 6 months minimum, 12 to 18 months reliably. Total cost of materials, under $2. Total cost of the knowledge, nothing, once you have it. One honest caution: fermentation is a method of prevention, not resurrection. It will not save produce that is already rotting. It does not work equally well on every vegetable. Very watery varieties like tomatoes require adjusted technique and more attention. And the flavor profile is tangy, sometimes sour, which takes adjustment if your household has never eaten fermented food before. This is not magic. It is biology with boundaries. But those boundaries are narrower than the food industry needed you to believe. The science was always published, the method was always proven, the jar was always in your cabinet. The salt was always on your shelf. What was missing was 10 minutes of knowledge that an entire industrial economy was quietly built on you never receiving. This is one method, one substance, one buried chapter from one deleted curriculum. Start asking what else was removed, and notice that the replacement always costs more.